The Galactic Academy was the most respected school in the known universe. Students from dozens of worlds came there to learn science, engineering, and technology. The buildings were tall and bright. The halls were always busy with alien students carrying data pads and talking in many different languages. It was a place of learning and pride. But there was one rule that everyone knew. Humans were not allowed. The ban had been in place for many years. Most students did not question it. They had heard the story when they first arrived. A human engineer had caused a terrible accident at the academy long ago. The damage had been severe. Lives had been lost. And so the council had made its decision. No human would ever study or work at the Galactic Academy again. At least, that was the official story. Ray did not study at the academy. He was not a student. He carried no data pad and wore no uniform. He wore a gray work suit with a small patch on the chest that said Maintenance Division. He walked the lower halls every morning before the students arrived. He fixed broken panels, replaced damaged wiring, and kept the energy systems running smoothly. He did his work quietly and without complaint. Most students did not even notice him. Ray was used to that. He had worked at the academy for 3 years. In that time, very few people had spoken to him. The other maintenance workers were aliens who mostly kept to themselves. The faculty members walked past him without a word. The students treated him like part of the wall. He existed in the background of a place that had officially decided his kind did not belong there. He did not argue with that. He simply did his job. On a cool Tuesday morning, Ray was crouched beside an open panel in the east corridor. The energy relay inside had been giving off weak signals for 2 days. If it failed completely, the lights and temperature controls for the entire east wing would go down. He had reported it through the proper channels. No one had responded. So he came to fix it himself. He worked slowly and carefully. He checked each wire before touching it. He tested the connections with a small handheld scanner. His hands moved with the kind of skill that only came from years of real experience. A group of students passed behind him. He heard their voices before he saw them. There were 4 of them, all from the same alien species. They had pale blue skin and tall, narrow frames. They walked in a loose group, talking loudly about an engineering exam scheduled for later that week. One of them glanced down at Ray. His name was Grex. He was tall even by his species standards, and he carried himself like someone who had never once doubted his own importance. He had strong grades, a sharp mind, and a mouth that he used far too freely. Grex slowed his walk and looked at Ray crouched by the panel. "A human," he said loudly, making sure his friends could hear. "Fixing wiring." He let out a short laugh. "I suppose that is the only thing they can be trusted to do." His friends laughed along with him. They did not stop walking. They moved on down the corridor, their voices fading as they turned a corner. Ray did not look up. He kept his eyes on the relay. His hands did not stop moving. He had heard worse. A little further down the hall, one student had stopped walking. She had been part of the same group but had fallen a step or 2 behind. Her name was Dara. She was younger than Grex, in only her 2nd year at the academy. She had the same pale blue skin as the others, but her eyes were darker and quieter. She noticed things that most people walked past. She stood still and watched Ray work. He did not rush. He did not fumble. He pulled out a secondary connector from his tool kit, checked its rating against the scanner, and fitted it into the relay with steady hands. Then he ran another scan. The signal came back clean. He checked it a second time just to be sure. Dara had studied basic engineering as part of her coursework. She knew what she was looking at. What Ray had just done was not simple. The relay configuration in the East Wing used an older system that most current engineers had never trained on. She had seen a faculty member stare at that same panel 2 days ago and walk away without touching it. Ray had fixed it in under 10 minutes. She opened her mouth slightly, as if she was about to say something. Then she heard Grex calling from the end of the corridor. Dara. Stop staring at the maintenance worker. You will be late. She closed her mouth. She looked at Ray one more time. He still had not looked up. He was closing the panel now, pressing the cover back into place with quiet, practiced movements. She turned and walked away. Ray secured the panel and stood up. He picked up his tool kit and slung it over his shoulder. He pulled out a small notebook, not a data pad, just a paper notebook, and made a short note about the repair. Time, location, part used, result. He had hundreds of these notes. No one had ever asked to see them. He walked on to the next job. The east corridor light stayed on all day without a flicker. By midday, the academy halls were full. Students moved between classes, talking and arguing and laughing. Ray moved through them like a ghost. He fixed a loose ceiling vent near the library. He replaced a cracked display screen outside the faculty offices. He patched a slow coolant leak in the basement level that had been ignored for weeks. None of it was glamorous work. None of it made anyone stop and say thank you. But all of it mattered. The academy functioned because someone kept it functioning. That someone just happened to be a human who was not supposed to be there in any meaningful way. At the end of his shift, Ray sat alone in the small maintenance room on the lowest floor. He ate a simple meal and looked out through a narrow window at the stars beyond the station. He had grown up hearing that humans were explorers, builders, problem solvers, people who kept going when things got hard. He believed that. He had always believed that. He just wished, sometimes, that someone else at the Galactic Academy believed it too. He finished his meal, packed up his things, and went back to work. There was always something else that needed fixing. It started with a sound. Not a loud sound. Not an explosion or a crash. It was a low hum that did not belong. Ray heard it first. He was working in the sublevel corridor, replacing a damaged coolant pipe, when the hum reached his ears. He stopped moving. He put down his wrench and stood very still. He had worked in this station for 3 years. He knew every sound it made. The steady pulse of the ventilation system. The soft click of the energy relays cycling through their routines. The faint vibration of the upper floors when large groups of students moved between classes. This sound was none of those things. It was coming from below. From the reactor level. Ray picked up his tool kit and moved quickly toward the lower stairwell. He did not run. Running in the corridors was not allowed, and he did not want to cause alarm before he knew what he was dealing with. But he walked fast, and his eyes were sharp, and his mind was already working through possibilities. He reached the reactor level door and pressed his maintenance badge to the scanner. The door opened. He stepped inside. The reactor room was large and dimly lit. The core sat in the center of the room behind thick safety glass. It was a tall cylindrical structure filled with slow-moving light. Under normal conditions, that light was a steady blue. Calm and even, like a slow breath. Right now, it was flickering. Ray moved closer to the glass and studied the core. The light was shifting from blue to a dull yellow at irregular intervals. The hum was louder here. He could feel it in his chest. He pulled out his scanner and began taking readings. The numbers were not good. A pressure seal on the inner core chamber had developed a fracture. It was small for now. But the reactor was already compensating by pulling more power through the secondary lines. If those lines overloaded, the fracture would spread. If the fracture spread far enough, the core would begin venting superheated energy into the station's main power grid. After that, things would get very bad, very fast. Ray was still reading his scanner when the alarm went off. It was loud and sharp, filling every corner of the reactor room with a pulsing red sound. The emergency lights along the walls switched on, casting everything in a deep red glow. Somewhere above him, he could hear the sound of heavy boots moving quickly across the floor. Within 2 minutes, the reactor room was full. 4 senior alien engineers arrived first. They were from the faculty, older and experienced, wearing the dark uniforms of the Academy's technical division. They moved to the main control panel along the far wall and began running their own diagnostics. Their voices were quick and clipped as they talked to each other in short sentences. Then came the Academy director, a tall gray-skinned alien named, formal title aside, most staff simply called him the director. He stood near the door and watched the engineers work. His face was unreadable. Then came the students. They were not supposed to be in the reactor room. But the alarm had emptied the classrooms, and a crowd had gathered in the corridor outside the open door. Grex was near the front, as he always was. He had pushed himself to a position where he could see inside. Several of his friends were beside him. Dara stood a few steps behind them. She was watching quietly. The senior engineers worked for several minutes. Ray stood to the side and watched them. He could see from where he stood that they were applying the standard emergency protocol. It was a solid procedure for most reactor faults. But it was not designed for a fracture in the inner pressure seal. The protocol would stabilize the power draw, but it would not stop the fracture from spreading. He checked his scanner again. The fracture had already grown slightly since he had first measured it. Time was not on their side. One of the senior engineers turned to the director and spoke in a low voice. Ray could not hear the words, but he could read the body language. The engineer was uncertain. The director's expression did not change, but his hands tightened slightly behind his back. Ray stepped forward. He did not announce himself. He did not ask permission. He simply moved to the secondary control panel, the smaller one on the left side of the room that the engineers had not touched, and began working. The room went quiet for a moment. Then Grex's voice came from the doorway. "Is that the maintenance human?" A few students laughed. "What is he doing?" someone else said. Grex crossed his arms and leaned against the doorframe. "Probably going to make it worse," he said loudly. "Someone should stop him before he kills us all." More laughter. Nervous laughter, but laughter all the same. One of the senior engineers looked over at Ray with an expression somewhere between irritation and confusion. "This panel is not part of the emergency protocol," the engineer said firmly. "Step away from it." Ray did not step away. He spoke without turning his head. "Your protocol is managing the power draw," he said. His voice was calm and even. "But the fracture is in the inner seal. If you do not relieve the pressure on that seal directly, the draw compensation will not hold. You have about 9 minutes before the secondary lines hit critical load." Silence. The engineer stared at him. Grex spoke again from the doorway. "A maintenance worker is giving engineering lessons now." "Wonderful." He turned to his friends with a wide smile. "The Academy has truly fallen." More laughter. Dara did not laugh. She was watching Ray's hands move across the secondary panel. She was watching his eyes move between his scanner and the controls. She had seen those hands work before, in the East Corridor, on a relay that a faculty member had given up on. She stayed quiet and kept watching. The senior engineers exchanged a look. Then they turned back to their own panel and continued with the standard protocol. They had years of training. They had followed this procedure dozens of times. They were not going to take instruction from a human in a gray work suit. Ray accepted that without a word. He kept working on the secondary panel. The hum from the reactor grew slightly louder. The flickering inside the core was faster now. The yellow was deeper. Ray's scanner beeped once. He silenced it and adjusted his approach. He began manually rerouting a small portion of the core pressure through a bypass channel that was rarely used. It was an old method. Not in any current manual. But it was the right method for this specific problem. His hands did not shake. The students in the doorway had gone quieter now. The laughter had faded. The alarm was still pulsing. The red light filled the room. And somewhere in that room, a human in a gray work suit was the only person doing exactly the right thing. He just had not proven it yet. The alarm kept pulsing. The red light filled every corner of the reactor room. The hum from the core was deeper now, and Ray could feel it moving through the floor and up into his boots. He had felt that kind of vibration before, in a smaller station years ago, during a training exercise that had turned into a real emergency. He had been the youngest person in the room that day too. He had fixed it then. He intended to fix it now. Ray stood at the secondary control panel and worked without stopping. His eyes moved between the scanner in his left hand and the controls in front of him. His right hand adjusted settings slowly and deliberately. He did not rush. Rushing caused mistakes, and mistakes in a reactor room caused things that could not be undone. The bypass channel he had opened was holding. A small portion of the core pressure was being rerouted away from the fracture point. It was not enough on its own. But it was buying time. He needed to do 3 more things, and he needed to do them in the right order. Behind him, the senior engineers were still working at the main panel. Their voices had grown quieter. The confident, clipped tones from earlier were gone. Now they spoke in short, uncertain exchanges. Ray could hear the worry in their words even without fully understanding everything they said. The standard protocol was not working. The numbers on their panel were not improving. 2 of the 4 engineers had stopped typing and were simply staring at the readings. The director stood near the wall. He had not moved. His eyes had shifted from the engineers to Ray, and they had stayed there. Grex was still in the doorway. The laughter from before had left his face. He was watching now instead of talking. His arms were still crossed, but there was a tension in his shoulders that had not been there before. The situation in the room had changed, and even Grex could feel it, even if he would not admit it. Dara stood just behind him. She had not taken her eyes off Ray since he started working. Ray moved to the left side of the secondary panel and opened a small access cover near the base. Inside was a manual pressure valve, the kind that existed on older reactor designs as a last resort backup. Most engineers trained on modern systems had never touched one. Many did not even know it was there. Ray had found it 2 years ago while doing routine maintenance checks. He had read its function in an old technical document he had found in the maintenance storage room, a document printed on actual paper, written before most of the Academy's current faculty had graduated. He had read it carefully. He had read everything carefully. He reached in and began adjusting the valve by hand. One of the senior engineers turned and saw what he was doing. The engineer crossed the room quickly. "That valve is not part of any approved procedure," the engineer said sharply. "If you adjust it incorrectly, you could rupture the secondary chamber entirely." Ray did not look up. "I know," he said quietly. "That is why I am adjusting it correctly." The engineer opened his mouth to respond. Then the main panel behind him let out a sharp warning tone. The engineer turned fast and went back to his station. Ray kept working. The valve required very precise movement. Too far in one direction and the pressure would spike. Too far in the other and the bypass channel would collapse. Ray turned it in small, careful increments, checking his scanner after each adjustment. His breathing was slow. His focus was complete. Everything else in the room had fallen away. There was only the valve, the scanner, and the numbers. The numbers began to change. Slowly at first. Almost too slowly to notice. But Ray noticed. The pressure reading on the fracture point dropped by a small margin. He adjusted the valve again. It dropped a little more. He opened a second bypass channel through the secondary panel controls, something that required him to hold a manual input with one hand while adjusting the valve with the other. It was awkward. His arms were stretched across two different parts of the panel at the same time. He held the position without complaint. The core hum shifted slightly in pitch. Just slightly. But Ray heard it. He heard it the way someone hears a change in a sound they have been listening to for a long time. The deep, heavy vibration that had been pressing up through the floor began to ease. Not completely. Not yet. But it was easing. Dara heard it too. She looked up at the core through the safety glass. The flickering yellow light was slowing down. The blue was coming back, faint at first, but steadier with each passing second. She said nothing. She just watched. Ray released the valve input and moved back to the main secondary panel. He had one more step. He needed to seal the rerouted pressure pathway permanently so it would not collapse when he removed the manual adjustment. It required him to override a safety lock and reset a core balancing parameter that the automated system had flagged as inactive. The automated system had flagged it as inactive because no one had used it in over 20 years. Ray used it now. He typed in the sequence from memory. He had memorized it from the same old paper document. He entered it carefully, digit by digit, checking each entry before moving to the next. When the final digit was in, he paused for just 1 second. Then he pressed confirm. The reactor room went very quiet. The hum dropped away. Not gradually, but cleanly, like a held breath finally released. The flickering inside the core stopped. The light settled into a deep, steady blue. The pressure readings on every panel in the room moved into the safe zone and stayed there. The alarm cut off mid-pulse, leaving a silence that felt almost loud in comparison. The red emergency lights faded. The normal lighting returned. Ray stood at the secondary panel and looked at his scanner one final time. Every reading was stable. The fracture point pressure was within normal range. The bypass channel was sealed and holding. The core balancing parameter was active and running cleanly. It was done. He lowered the scanner slowly. He stood still for a moment. The room was completely silent around him. No one spoke. Not the engineers. Not the director. Not Grex. Not anyone. Ray's legs felt very heavy. He had not eaten since early morning. He had been working since before sunrise. The intensity of the last hour had taken everything he had left. He felt it all at once, like a wave arriving after traveling a very long distance. His knees buckled. He did not grab for the panel. He did not try to catch himself. He simply went down, slowly and without drama, and sat on the floor of the reactor room with his back against the panel and his scanner resting in his lap. His eyes stayed open. He was not unconscious. He was simply finished. The director took one step forward. Then another. He stopped a short distance from Ray and looked down at him. Then he looked at the core. Then back at Ray. Dara pushed past Grex in the doorway and walked into the room. She crossed the floor and crouched down beside Ray. She did not say anything clever or important. She just looked at him with steady eyes and said, simply and quietly, "You did it." Ray looked at her. He nodded once. Then he closed his eyes and rested. The director did not sleep that night. He sat alone in his office on the upper floor of the academy, long after the station had gone quiet. The emergency had been contained. The engineers had filed their reports. The students had returned to their rooms. Ray had been taken to the medical bay, where the staff said he was stable and simply needed rest. The station was safe. But the director could not stop thinking about what he had seen in that reactor room. He had watched 4 senior engineers fail to solve the problem. He had watched a human maintenance worker in a gray work suit walk in, say very little, and fix everything alone. He had watched it happen in front of his own eyes, and he still could not fully explain it. He needed to understand. He opened the station's security archive on his desk screen. The academy had cameras in every corridor, every lab, every maintenance area. The footage was stored automatically and kept for 7 years before being deleted. The director had never had reason to review most of it. It was simply there, running quietly in the background, the way Ray had been running quietly in the background. He typed in Ray's maintenance identification number and ran a search. The results filled his screen. There were hundreds of entries. The director leaned forward in his chair and began to go through them, starting from the earliest date in the archive. The first clip showed Ray in the basement level, 3 years ago, shortly after he had started working at the academy. He was crouched beside a coolant pipe that had developed a slow leak near one of the main power junctions. The leak was small, but the junction it was near powered the entire north wing. If the coolant had reached the junction, the resulting short circuit could have caused a fire that the station's automated systems might not have caught in time. Ray had found it, fixed it, and filed a maintenance note that no one had ever read. The director moved to the next clip. Ray, 18 months ago, in the upper corridor near the faculty offices. A ventilation valve had been installed incorrectly during a routine upgrade. The error was subtle, the kind that would not show up in a standard check. But over time, it would have caused a pressure buildup in the ventilation system that could have damaged the structural panels in the ceiling above the main lecture hall. Ray had spotted it during a walkthrough, corrected the installation, and again filed a note that had gone unread. The director moved through clip after clip. Ray fixing a fault in the water recycling system that would have failed during a peak usage period. Ray catching a wiring error in the student lab that could have caused a serious electrical problem. Ray resealing a section of the outer hull plating where microfractures had begun forming, work that technically fell outside his job description but that he had done anyway because it needed doing. Every single time, he had filed a note. Every single time, the note had gone unread. The director sat back in his chair. His chest felt tight. He had been running this academy for 11 years. He had prided himself on knowing how the station worked, on understanding every system and every team beneath him. But he had never once read a maintenance note filed by the human technician in the basement level. He had never once thought to look. He stayed with that feeling for a moment. Then he turned back to the screen and kept searching. He was not sure what made him type the next search. Something in the back of his mind had been pressing at him since the reactor room. A question he had not wanted to ask directly. He typed in a different search term this time. Not Ray's name. Something older. He searched for the original incident. The one that had started the human ban. The files that came up were old. Much older than Ray's maintenance logs. They were dated from before the director's time at the academy, from when he had been a student himself on another station. He opened the first file. It was an official report. Formal language, precise formatting. It stated clearly that a human engineer had caused a catastrophic systems failure at the academy. That the humans' reckless and unauthorized actions had led to severe damage and the loss of 2 lives. That the council had reviewed the evidence and determined that humans could not be trusted in academic or technical environments. The ban had followed shortly after. The director had read this report before. Everyone at the academy had read it. It was considered settled history. He kept reading. Near the bottom of the archive folder, behind several layers of old filing categories, he found something that should not have been there. Or rather, something that someone had clearly hoped would never be found. It was a second report, written by a different hand, dated 3 days after the first. It was marked as an internal review document. It had never been made public. The director read it slowly. The second report told a different story entirely. According to this document, the original system's failure had not been caused by the human engineer. It had been caused by a faulty component that had been installed incorrectly by the station's own technical team. The human engineer, a man whose name the report listed simply as a reference number, had actually attempted to stop the failure. He had worked alone, without equipment, trying to manually seal the breach while everyone else evacuated. He had saved 11 lives that day. He had also not survived. The first report had been written after his death, by people who were afraid of being blamed for the faulty installation. They had changed the story. They had buried the second report and sealed the archive. And then the ban had been put in place, built on a foundation that was entirely false. The director closed the files. He sat in his office for a long time without moving. Then he picked up his communication device and began making calls. By the following morning, every student and faculty member at the Galactic Academy had received a notice. A full assembly had been called. Attendance was not optional. The message gave no reason, only a time and a location. The main hall filled quickly. Students came in uncertain and curious, talking quietly among themselves. Greg sat with his usual group near the middle of the hall, arms crossed, expression unreadable. Dara sat alone near the side, her eyes moving to the front of the room where the director stood beside a large display screen. Ray was not present. He was still in the medical bay. The director waited until the hall was completely silent. Then he spoke. He did not start with the ban. He did not start with Ray. He started with the footage. He pressed a button, and the screen filled with the first security clip. Ray in the basement level, 3 years ago, fixing the coolant leak near the power junction. The hall watched in silence. Then the next clip. Then the next. One after another, year after year, the recordings played. Quiet work, careful hands, problems solved and disasters prevented by a man in a gray work suit whom no one had ever thanked. The hall stayed completely silent. Then the director showed them the 2 reports. He read the key parts aloud in a steady voice. The faulty component. The human engineer who had stayed behind. The 11 lives saved. The false account written afterward. The sealed archive hidden for decades. He paused after the last line. He looked out at the students and faculty in front of him. Everything we were told about that day, he said quietly, was a lie. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Greg stared at the screen. His arms had slowly dropped from their crossed position during the footage. They now rested at his sides. His face held an expression that had no easy name. Dara looked down at her hands. Her eyes were very bright. The recordings kept playing on the screen behind the director, looping back to the beginning. Ray, working alone, in the quiet corridors of a place that had told him he did not belong there. The main hall was still quiet. The director stood at the front with the screen behind him still showing the recordings. The footage had looped back to the beginning again. Ray in the basement level. Ray in the east corridor. Ray in the sublevel. Working alone, working quietly, working without anyone ever asking him to do more than the minimum. The director turned and pressed a button. The screen went dark. He looked out at the hall full of students and faculty. He had prepared a long speech. He had written it out the night before, after reading the second report, after sitting alone in his office with the weight of what he had found pressing down on him. The speech had formal language and careful phrasing. It acknowledged the error in measured terms. It outlined the steps the Academy would take going forward. He had left it on his desk. What he said instead was shorter and more honest. We were wrong, he said. This Academy was wrong. The ban was wrong. And the people who built it on false records knew it was wrong when they did it. He paused. That ends today. He reached to the podium beside him and picked up a single printed document. It was the official order lifting the human ban. He had drafted it himself in the early hours of the morning. It had already been signed and transmitted to the Galactic Council before the assembly began. The ban was already gone. This moment was not about paperwork. It was about saying out loud, in front of everyone, what the paperwork meant. He held up the document so the hall could see it. As of this morning, the human ban at the Galactic Academy is formally and permanently lifted. Any human who meets the academic requirements of this institution is welcome here. As a student. As a faculty member. As anything they are qualified to be. He set the document back down. I am sorry it took this long. The hall remained quiet for another moment. Then, slowly, a sound began to build. It was not loud at first. It started somewhere near the back of the room and moved forward. By the time it reached the front rows it had become something full and steady. Not cheering exactly. More like a release. The sound of a large group of people letting go of something they had been holding without realizing it. Dara stood up. She did not raise her hand or wait to be called on. She simply stood, and the sound in the hall faded as people noticed her. She was not the most senior student. She was not a representative of any group. She was just a second-year student with dark quiet eyes who had watched a man fix a reactor and never forgotten it. She spoke clearly so the whole hall could hear. I want to apologize to Ray, she said. Not just for yesterday, or for the ban. I want to apologize for every time I saw him working and said nothing. For every time I walked past him like he was not there. For every time I let someone else speak badly about humans and stayed quiet because it was easier. She paused. Her voice was steady. He deserved better than what this place gave him. We all should have done better. She sat back down. No one laughed. No one shifted uncomfortably or looked away. The hall received her words in silence, and that silence felt like agreement. At the medical bay on the lower level, Ray was sitting up in his bed when the director walked in. He had been awake for a few hours. The medical staff had cleared him of anything serious. Exhaustion, mild dehydration, some strain in his shoulders from the extended reach during the repair work. Nothing that rest and a proper meal had not already begun to address. He looked better than he had on the reactor room floor. His color had returned. His eyes were clear. The director pulled a chair close to the bed and sat down. He placed the lifting order on the small table beside Ray's bed without explanation. Ray looked at it. He read the heading. He read the first two lines. He did not say anything for a moment. Then he said, "How long has this been possible?" The director understood the question. It was not asking about the paperwork. It was asking about the truth. How long had the truth been sitting in that sealed archive, waiting? Too long, the director said. I am sorry, Ray. For all of it. Ray looked at the document again. He was quiet for a while. Outside the small window of the medical bay, the station moved through open space. Stars drifted slowly past. He had looked at those same stars many nights from the maintenance room on the lowest floor. He had looked at them and thought about what it meant to keep going in a place that did not want you there. He picked up the document and held it carefully. "Thank you," he said. That was all. No anger. No long speech about everything he had endured. Just two words, spoken simply, meaning everything they were supposed to mean. The director nodded. He stood, shook Ray's hand firmly, and left the room. Ray sat alone with the document in his hands. He was still sitting there 20 minutes later when he heard a knock at the open door. He looked up. Greg stood in the doorway. He looked different without his usual group around him. Smaller somehow, though he was still tall. His expression had none of its normal sharpness. He stood with his hands at his sides and his eyes on the floor for a moment before he raised them to meet Ray's. He did not have a speech prepared. It was clear from the way he stood there that he had come without knowing exactly what he was going to say. He had just come. I said things, Greg started. Then he stopped. He tried again. I said things that were not fair. I did not know you. I never tried to know you. I just repeated what everyone around me believed, and I said it louder than most. He paused. That is not an excuse. I know it is not. Ray watched him. His face was calm. Grex looked at him directly. I am sorry. I mean that. The room was quiet. Ray held the lifting order in his lap. He thought about the east corridor, about Grex walking past with his friends, about the laughter that had followed him into the reactor room. He thought about 3 years of gray walls and unread maintenance notes and meals eaten alone. He thought about all of it. And then he let it go. I know you mean it, Ray said. It is all right. Grex nodded once. He looked like he wanted to say more but understood that what had been said was enough. He gave a small, respectful nod and walked back out into the corridor. Ray looked down at the document in his hands again. 3 days later, he sat in the director's office and signed his enrollment papers. The Advanced Science Program. Full student status. Starting the following term. The director signed his own copy and placed it in the official record without ceremony, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. Which, Ray thought, it should have always been. He walked out of the director's office and into the main corridor. Students moved around him as they always had. But something was different now. A few of them looked at him with recognition. A few nodded. One young student, someone Ray had never spoken to, stopped and said simply, "Welcome." Ray smiled. It was a small smile, quiet and genuine. He walked on through the bright halls of the Galactic Academy, enrollment papers folded in the chest pocket of his gray work suit, heading toward the first day of the rest of his life. He had kept this place running for 3 years from the shadows. Now, at last, he walked through it in the light.